At this time, I'll ask everyone in the room to please silence your cell phones and electronic devices, and I'll ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Barnes.
Here.
Chaplin. Here. Delgado. Facilla. Present. Hannon.
Here.
Nudo.
Here.
Dial.
Here, thank
Quorum
you.
is present.
Our next item is the approval of our agenda for today's meeting. I'll ask for a motion in a second, please.
I move the agenda be approved as distributed.
I'll second that motion.
It's been moved and seconded to approve our agenda for today's meeting. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? That motion carries. Audience participation. Don't see anything out there. Any electronic communications for the board, Beth? Beth's gonna.
I'll answer for her.
She's got another question coming. She's got questions coming.
Oh, you do have one? Oh,
Nothing.
okay.
Thank you. Our next item is the approval of the minutes from our board meeting, the open session board meeting from August 31st of 2022.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the board meeting minutes from our open session, August 31st, 2022. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? That motion carries. Communications, Carl? Anything from any board members that you've received? All right. Our next item is the compensation study from Gallagher Company Consultants.
I'll do a quick introduction. We've got two members of the consulting team with Gallagher and Associates. It's Quyang Pan and Jim Fox. They're not here, but they are on Zoom. And then I've got both Amy Snyder, Chief of Staff, and Jacinda Cromer, HR Director. Up front here, they're the two staff members that have been the point people for the study. And as you'll recall, this in the spring we approved. Actually, it was more toward the end of the winter. We approved doing this study as we were encountering more and more frequently hiring difficulties, and so we wanted to evaluate where our primarily staff salaries, although we ended up doing the entire employee group, how we compared to other transit agencies and how we compared to other entities in Champaign-Urbana. And so with that, I will turn it over to Quyang and Jim if they are online. And Tech, do you know if we have audio from Quyang and Jim?
Yeah, I had my mic on mute. I don't know why. Can you hear me now?
Yes, Jim.
All right. Can you see the screen with the?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you, Carl. And hello to the board members. So I'm going to go through this report. It is about 40 pages long. There is a lot of information to pass on to you, but we'll try and be as simple as possible. I'm not going to read these slides. I'm going to go over them and basically summarize the content of them. You can read them at your leisure. We are going to talk about not only the background, but job evaluation and what that is, the compensation study that we conducted, what we did with that information to develop a salary structure. And then we have some information on pay practices and benefits that we also collected. And then we have some recommendations on what to do with this information that we have in front of you. So the next slide, Quyang. So we were engaged by Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit to conduct a market salary review of all salaried and hourly employees. And what we wanted to do was apply a job evaluation methodology to all of the MTD positions to establish internal equity. What a job evaluation methodology does is it compares all of the duties and responsibilities of each job against a common set of criteria to establish the internal hierarchy of jobs in a fair and competitive fashion. We also collected market data from other transit agencies and other local entities in the area to get a sense of what the market's paying for similar jobs. And then we provide some recommendations on developing formal salary ranges and then how to make some movements of those employees to those salary ranges based on their experience and background. So next slide. The job evaluation system basically is a process of determining the relative value of jobs within an organization. And so when we're doing that, we're looking at all of the content in a job. What are they doing? How are they doing it? What are the requirements of the job? And this sets up a hierarchy of jobs from high to low. And then that sets up the basis for determining what's fair pay. We used the decision band method, which is a proprietary job evaluation method, which is fairly simple and easy to use. Go on to the next. Basically, it says the importance of the job is related to its decision-making requirements. And decision-making is measurable and it's common to all of the jobs. So the value of the job basically is represented based on the characteristics of the decisions that are made within a job. Now, some jobs may say, well, I don't make decisions. People tell me what to do and I do it. There's still decisions in those kinds of jobs. We're only looking at work content, the job duties. We're not looking at market demand, working conditions, or anything outside of what is being done in the job. And all of the decisions a person makes are important, but they're not all created equal. Now, very briefly, decision band method is a three-step process. First of all, we look at the characteristic of the decisions that are made in each one of the tasks of each job. And simply, there is a low-level kind of defined decision, which we call band A, moving all the way up to band F, which on the right-hand side of the chart, which is policy. Once we get the jobs in those buckets based on their characteristics of the decision-making that's required, we then look within that bucket. For example, we'll have a bucket of B jobs that are primarily operational kinds of decisions. We'll look within that bucket and say, do any of those jobs coordinate other jobs within that same bucket? So we're looking at some supervisory characteristics. And once we get that bucket separated into those that coordinate and those that don't, then we look at more refined things like difficulty, complexity, diversity of the tasks, the knowledges and skills required in order to perform those tasks. And we subgrade them. So there's a band, grade, and subgrade. There's three components. We look at the job 3 different times. And when we went through that process, we did this from all of the job descriptions that we had available. And then we reviewed it with Amy and Jacinda extensively to make sure that we understood the jobs. So collaboratively, we agreed to the assignment and placement of each job we call the DBM grade, decision band method grade. So that has been validated through that process and verified that this is the right hierarchy of the jobs. So we set that information aside. We then move on to collecting compensation data. And what we did was we identified a number of organizations, 27 to be exact, which would cover not only local entities in the surrounding market area, but also comparable transit agencies throughout the country that would have very similar jobs to MTD. Now, we didn't get data from all of those organizations, but we attempted it quite radically. I mean, we kept asking them for information. Some of them just refused. Some of them didn't have enough time. And eventually we received data from 17 organizations. Now, we also went to some of those organizations, their websites, and collected information, which we call data mining. And we collected information from 3 additional organizations. So this is the market data that we collected. Now, once we had that information available to us, and we asked for minimum salaries, maximum salaries, salary ranges, what's the actual pay of employees within each one of those jobs. And then we took that data and said, well, this probably needs to be adjusted based on when that data was collected and when the data was effective. So we aged the data using a market trend factor of 3% per year up to January 1 of 2022.
Say, Jim, could you turn your speakers down just a little bit? We're getting a little bit of feedback on our end.
Yeah, I can do that. See if I don't cut you out here. Oh, yeah. I'm probably blowing you off the chair there, aren't I? Is that better?
Much better.
No? Is it better? Okay. So we adjusted that up to January 1st of 2022. Then, since the data comes from different labor markets, we wanted to adjust it to the cost of labor within Champaign, Illinois area. So we went to a third party called Economic Research Institute and collected, they give us cost of labor data from a variety of different cities and locations throughout the country. They are the gold standard for compensation specialists. And we adjusted that data to the Champaign, Illinois labor market. So for example, if we had collected data from New York City, well, we all understand that New York City pays relatively well. So we would have had to adjust that data down to be equivalent to what's comparable for Champaign. And then what we did, once we had that data, we looked at all of the data to make sure that we didn't have any strange outliers or data that just didn't seem to make sense. Even though it was a good match, it may have just been out of order for some reason. So we may have excluded some outliers to make the data a little bit more consistent. So we have valid market data for 65 benchmark jobs. We couldn't get sufficient data for 3 positions: the check writer, the C-cart scheduler, and the Illinois terminal director. And that's probably because other transit agencies don't have comparable jobs, or they didn't feel that the match was appropriate. So once we had that market data, we then looked at, well, what's MTD paying for that same job? And we calculated differences. So a positive figure on the next couple of charts shows that you are above the market, and a negative figure indicates that you are below the market. Now, the point that we looked at was what we call the 50th percentile of the market. That's right in the middle. Half pay more, half pay less. And most of our government clients like to look at that data because it's right in the middle. It isn't skewed one way or the other. Next slide. Now, when you look at the percentages, there's going to be some that are plus or minus 5% from the market, plus or minus 10% from the market, and so on and so forth. So compensation professionals basically look at that and say, well, if your data is within plus or minus 5% of the market data, you are considered to be highly competitive. If it's within 10% plus or minus the market, you're still competitive. And once you get beyond 10%, then there may be some misalignment. And the misalignment, if it gets beyond 15%, may suggest that there is an issue that needs to be further looked into. It may be because performance, turnover, job change, a variety of different factors, which may not necessarily mean that the pay is misaligned. It's just that these other factors have an influence on what the market is showing. So once we've done that, we then look at, well, where are you in relationship to the 50th percentile? So if you look at this chart, the middle column, the 50th percentile, you are below the market by 5.6%. That's competitive. Your minimums, which are basically the market 25th percent, you are a little bit above the market, which would suggest that you probably have some difficulty in hiring, but not significant, because it's a little bit higher than the average of the market. And then at the maximum, you are significantly less than the market. So your salary ranges might not be high enough in relationship to the market. But overall, 5.6% off from the market suggests that you are overall fairly competitive with the market. So once we had that information available, we then went and combined the job evaluation results with the market data. And what we wanted to do was make sure that we understood the internal equity and the market data and how that's related, so that we could set up a salary structure which was not only market competitive, but also internally equitable. Now, we ran a couple of different models, and we used what's called a regression analysis, which is a statistical process for basically trying to find the common ground between market data.
Jim, would you mind if I just hold you up for 1 second?
Yep.
All right, so real quick, you're talking about these percentiles, and you got to forgive me because it's been about 20 years since I took a statistics class, but I'm guessing that the 25th percentile would be our lower paid positions, so maybe more operators, and our 50th percentile or 75th would be more the executive level. Is that what the percentiles we're looking at here?
No. And I'm glad you brought that point up, because that's a good clarification, and other people have been confused by that too. So if we take all of your jobs that we matched with the market, and we say, well, what is the average 25th percentile of all of those jobs? What's the market 25th percentile, meaning that 25% pay lower at that job and 75% pay higher? What is that average? And then how does that relate to you? So if we had an accountant, we'd have market data for the 25th percentile of what the market pays for that accountant. We'd also have the 75th percentile. This chart simply says, let's take all of those jobs, accountants and bus operators and technicians and mechanics and HR directors and finance directors, and what's the average 25th percentile, and how far off are you at the 25th percentile? Does that clarify it?
So let's say this accountant, he makes $50,000 a year. He'd be at the 25th percentile. An accountant that makes $75,000 a year might be at the 50th percentile. Is that kind of what you're saying? And then we're comparing where we're at in that range at each point?
Yes.
So we take all of our accountants and we're looking at the mean pay we pay an accountant, and then the high and the low, essentially.
Yep.
Got it.
So you look at the 25th and the 75th percentile and say, this is the lower paying accountants. These are the higher paying accountants. Where are they?
Got it. I guess carry on. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. So anyway, I was back to this regression model, and I'm going to show you a couple of graphs. Now, most people freak out when they look at this stuff. I'm going to try and make this very simple. The green dots, or the green diamonds, are basically the market data. So if you look at, let's say, B2 down on the horizontal axis, you'll see that there are some green dots there, and there's also some probably black or blue. I don't know how it shows up on your screen. Also, there's some, darker dots at that same point. So the darker dots are what you're paying for those jobs at that internal equity level. Now, if you go up from B2, and let's say you just go up to that line that's in the middle of those dots, and then take a sharp left turn, you'll find out that the average pay is somewhere, it looks like about $50,000. So a B2 on average, when you look at all of the market and the kind of the line of best fit through that market data, shows you that as you move from A1 to B3, there is an increased salary for increased responsibility, because A1 is a lower level job and a B3 is a higher level job. Now, when you get to the C4s, it's the same thing. And the trend is a little bit different. The A's through B's, the market line and so the solid line and the dotted line are almost on top of each other, which means that you're paying the hourly people, which are the A's and B's, right about at the market on average. Not everybody, but on average. And then when you look at the C4 to F10, which are the salaried jobs, you find that the market data, the dotted line, seems to trend a little higher than what your trend is showing. So there's a gap there between that gold line and the solid line and the dotted line, which suggests that there may be a gap in pay for some of the salaried employees. Now, we looked at that together like this, and then I'm going to show you two more charts, which may be a little easier to understand. So this is simply taking the A and B chart and showing that with the dots and the trend line. You'll see that the market actually is a little bit lower. That dotted line is a little bit lower at the A, at the lower level, up towards the left there, and almost right on top of the line as you get to the B3s. So in a sense, what's this saying is your hourly salaries appear to be pretty competitive just on an overall trend. And if you go on to the salary jobs, which is now the C4 to the F10, you'll see that the lines don't overlap as well. There's some divergence of the dotted line from the solid line. And that gap between the dotted line and the solid line suggests that there may be some corrective action that may be appropriate for those jobs. Okay, so what we did is we took those lines and we created a salary structure around that market line, that dotted line. We said, let's develop salary ranges so that the midpoint of the salary range is right on that market line. And there would be a minimum and a maximum. But the middle point of that range would be right on top of that market line. And so if there's a change that MTD decides to do, there might be some adjustments for some employees. We would suggest that no pay cuts occur. That's kind of draconian in my opinion. And after implementation is fully executed, whatever pay or schedule that you have or want to implement, all the employees will be paid within that new pay range, and no employees will be paid below the minimum of the new ranges that we're suggesting. Now, once we put the salary ranges together, then we have to decide how are we going to put people into that range, on what criteria? Well, one criteria would be, let's just put them all, make sure everybody's at the minimum at least. Well, that's one option. There's another option which says, well, let's make sure that we account for not only their time in their position at MTD, but maybe time between the hire date and their position date and previous work experience. So we went through an analysis that basically accounted for this, for their total years of experience for the salaried staff. So the examples below says, for example, Alex, current title is an accountant. He worked as an accountant specialist for 6 years for another employee. So we would consider that to be relevant experience. So we would give him credit for all of the years of his prior experience. Kelly, on the other hand, is a current benefits supervisor and worked as an office supervisor for 5 years at another employer. So we considered that experience somewhat relevant. So we gave them, or Kelly, slightly less credit in this calculation. So this is the formula. I'm not going to go over this, but time in seat was equal to 1 year equals 1 year. Time from hire date to position date is a half, and so on and so forth. So if their previous experience was not relevant to any of their current job, we didn't give them any credit for that previous experience. And this has been a method we've used previously. It seems to be well accepted in many of our clients. So to implement these salary ranges, we placed employees within their ranges based on 3 proposed methods. Bring the staff, the salaried staff, up to their minimum, the minimum of the market. That's one possibility. It's the least expensive. The second method is to calculate the salary using their time in their current position. That's a second method. It's slightly more expensive. And then the third method would be to calculate the salary using total years of service, both at previous jobs as well as MTD experience. And that would be the more expensive of the three options. In terms of increments, we're suggesting a 3% increment from the range minimum for the credit from their previous experience or their current experience at MTD. So next, okay, so that's the recommendation that we made on pay. Now, we also collected information on benefits. I'm going to have Quyang go over much of this, but here is the information of those comparable organizations. So MTD's operating budget is about 46.3 million. The market median is a little bit larger. That's again the 50th percentile of other transit organizations and local entities. Annual payroll, yours is 30.3 million. The market median is slightly less than yours. Full-time employee equivalents, you have 363. The market median is a little bit less. So we're kind of in, we collected information. What this says is we collected information from organizations that are of similar size to you and similar characteristics. So we think that's a good comparable group. Next. So I'm going to let Quyang take the rest of this.
All right. Thank you, Jim. So the rest of the slides, these are the pay practices and benefits information we collected from those local entities and transit agencies as well. So whoever answered to these specific questions, their reported data were included in the calculation of the median and average. So this particular chart shows the recent actual salary increase. So MTD overall is consistent with the market practice that provide close to 3% increase to employees' actual salary. Now there's some additional information from MTD, which showed here, so I'm not going to read through that. But overall, for salary increase, that's consistent with the market. Established salary structure and adjustment. So we know that currently MTD don't have a established salary structure for the salaried staff, but there is a structure for the hourly staff. And then the overall structure adjustment looks like MTD is more competitive with the market average or mean increase for the past year. So of course, there are a lot of organizations, they reported adjusted their ranges in 2021. And then for other organizations, they adjusted in 2020. So among those 17 organizations, 14 organizations adjust salary ranges in the past 2 years also. So these are the information with regard to the design of the structure. So the common answer for employee to arrive at the maximum of their salary range is between 10 to 20 years. For those employees to progress from their assigned range minimum to the maximum. Of course, there are some organizations reported that their employees rarely or never reach range maximum. So for MTD's hourly employee, looks like on average it took 8 years. So you are consistent with the market. The planned compensation salary study, it looks like there are 9 organizations either completed or is undergoing some kind of a compensation study. COVID impact, the most common responses we see is that pay freeze in 2020, or only provide salary adjustment or range adjustment for certain groups of employee, but not all of them. Vacation, personal days, again, MTD's current practice is slightly ahead of the market. Sick days, MTD is ahead of the market as well. Consistent with the average, but if we look at the median, you are a little bit, you did better than the market median. Briefland and holiday, pretty consistent overall. Define the benefits plan. So that's the retirement plan. So it looks like that's pretty consistent across the board. Define contribution plan. So MTD has the specific contribution to the maximum, which the data we collected were in percentage. But I think overall, it is consistent with the market. Let's move on to the health insurance plan. Based on the data that we collected and MTD provided, if we look at the total, it is still pretty consistent with the market for health insurance, and then the annual out-of-pocket amount. This chart is for the salary employee, and then the next chart shows the rates for hourly employee, which overall is consistent as well. We'll move on to the recommendation part. Jim, you want to go through that?
Sorry, I was muted again. So once you complete a study, it shouldn't just sit there on the shelf and remain dormant for years and years, because eventually you'll end up having to do another study at if you hire somebody from the outside, it's a fairly costly endeavor. So what we suggest are a couple of ongoing maintenance procedures which will keep your salary system in line with the market on an ongoing basis. And what we have found is if you do these things, you should never, I'll say never, meaning 20 years, have to call in an outside firm to help you adjust your salaries or conduct a salary study like we did. So one of the things we suggest is that you adopt a formal compensation philosophy to guide the administration in the future of your compensation system. This does two things. One, it focuses your attention as a board member on how the compensation system is going to be managed in the future. And secondly, it's a communication tool to employees to say, this is what we value in our compensation, and this is how we propose to manage this compensation system into the future. Now, we think also there should be some guidelines. For example, how people move through the range, how people are placed in the range when they're hired. And we have a couple of guidelines stated here. How should individual salary adjustments, whether that's done on an annual basis or less frequently or more frequently, how should that be managed so that you maintain competitiveness? At the same time, individuals feel that they're making progress within their range. And what we normally suggest, and this is something that most private sector employers do, but many public sectors do not, and that is if you're going to make adjustments, adjust the salary ranges by, for example, 2%, but adjust the base salary of employees at a higher rate than 2%. So if you pick 2% for the salary ranges, you might want to adjust employee salaries by 2.5% to 3%. And then we think you should conduct a similar market study, such as we conducted here, with the same participants, with the same local entities and transit agencies, about every 2 to 3 years to make sure that you are still in line with the market. Now, in high inflationary times like we are, we suggest this about every 2 to 3 years. if we were in a low inflationary time period, like we were before, I don't know, 2021, 2022 time period, we would extend that out to every 4 or 5 years. But those would be our recommendations for maintaining the system into the future. So I think that's all we've got to say. And if there are questions, I'd be glad to take those. I think we've extended our time more than what Carl and Amy and Jacinda wanted us to take. But hopefully we've clarified a lot of things.
Questions for our presenters on their, go ahead.
Sorry, Phil, before you start, Jim and Quyang, could you both mute? And I'm going to ask Amy and Jacinda to try to field the questions first, because Jim's and Chuyang's audio is very difficult for those of us in the room here. We're getting a lot of clipping and feedback. If they can't answer the question, then of course, Jim and Quyang, you can jump on, but let's try that.
Well, I had a question on each section. I guess the most recent one would be on this benefits summary. This is pages 36 and 37. It's awful darn hard to compare. I guess it seems like a lot of our units are maybe either not applicable or in different units where it's percentages versus a cash amount in the market. How are you guys interpreting that?
Hi, this is Jacinda, HR Director. Thank you for the question. I believe that's a great question because the actual PowerPoint and the data survey that we sent out to people asked for percentages. So if you look at the top, it says percentages, but then sometimes people had just dollar amounts to list. I calculated as percentages because we have so many different health plans that we offer. We're part of the local government health plan. It's a state plan through Central Management Services, CMS. And so we have about 7 different options: Health Alliance, Health Link, different OSF type things. So many options. And so they're all different amounts. And so it was hard to give just a dollar amount since it's more of a range. So since we cover 100% for employee only, then that's what I included. But I believe we provided the benefits spreadsheet, the rate table, perhaps to you, either in a separate document or through your email. Yes. So I could answer specific questions if you want, but one reason why, I don't know that you asked this, but there are a lot of NAs in our section because the LGHP, the local government health plan that we are part of, doesn't do split apart options. So it's health, dental, and vision all together. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think I'll look this over, and
Okay.
that makes sense. I just didn't see the handout, and it wasn't.
Sure.
So I guess my other question is, I do think we're looking at almost 2 different studies for 2 different classes of employees. I mean, there's always exceptions, but generally, if a fella has a CDL or he's a diesel mechanic, he's looking at Unit 4 as far as his career options. Maybe he's got a wife and kids. He's tied to the community. We're not necessarily competing with Los Angeles or Portland as far as our diesel mechanics, our operators, Illinois terminal staff, custodians, stuff like that. And then on the flip side, it feels like most of our, Carl's executive team, the people we've lost, we're losing a lot of those guys to Colorado and all these other, far-flung places where it's not as much people are looking at Carl or Unit 4. They're looking at other transit agencies across the country. So I guess I would be curious to know if they adjusted for that when, obviously the market we're looking at for CDL operators is going to be less about Portland and LA and Washington and more about, other agencies that have diesel mechanics, like maybe Parkland College's diesel program or Unit 4, 116, things like that. And then I guess the other flip side of it is on the executive end, the tax burden is going to be really different between like Illinois and Florida. So if, you got a high earning couple where the wife maybe gets a job with us and the husband's looking for a job in Illinois, they both have high incomes, they're paying Illinois income tax. That's going to be a lot harder compared to like Texas or Florida. And I didn't know if they made any adjustment for the tax burden here. So those are my kind of questions on the compensation side.
Points noted, Phil. This is Amy Snyder, Chief of Staff. Your final point about the cost of labor analysis from the Economic Research Institute, we could have Quyang and Jim speak to that specifically to your point. So Jim and Quyang, you're on deck. I would just like to comment that as far as staff goes, I feel very confident in the transit agencies that were surveyed, and we got really strong participation. I think a comparison to a large city, a legacy system, would just not be reflective. And I think when we do enter into a recruitment scenario, we're not gonna, getting people to come to Champaign-Urbana is, for a staff position, is going to be really challenging for us. So somebody coming from one of these lateral agencies and being competitive with them, I think is appropriate for the analysis. But Jim or Quyang, do you want to comment on the process of the cost of labor and what that takes into account?
Yes, thanks, Amy. If you refer to page 13, we tried to spell it out. Obviously, we probably could have done better. But the cost of labor is basically an index that is established by a third party, the third party being Economic Research Institute. And they do surveys throughout the country year after year after year. And what they do when they put this index together is they take account of the cost, not only the cost of labor, but the cost, some components of the cost of living, such as housing and taxes, and other large components that affect how much it costs to live in a particular geographic area. So yes, in fact, we did adjust it. We adjusted the market data to Champaign, Illinois market.
Yes.
So are we, I guess my question is, are we paying the same attention to local and nationwide factors when we're comparing the staff level jobs and the hourly jobs? Because I do kind of think you'd be looking at different things for each one, right? Like you said, our staff are primarily coming from peer agencies, and our hourly are primarily locals that are coming from local agencies, right?
You want me to handle that?
I wasn't sure if you were going to answer, Jim. I believe your question is, did you weight kind of what the data was based on whether it was hourly or exempt? I do think that's a question that Jim or Quyang should probably chime in on.
So when you look at local entities surrounding Champaign, and you're looking at comparable jobs like diesel mechanic and bus operators and so on and so forth, the labor market around Champaign is going to be nearly the same. So even if you're 25 miles away from the center city of Champaign, and that was where the local entity was, the adjustment factor is going to be probably less than if you get further out from the Champaign, Illinois area. So I guess the short answer is we used the same index calculation or the same formula given to us by the Economic Research Institute for every piece of data, regardless of what organization it was from.
So I think you kind of totally missed my question there. So what I'm looking at is, I feel like people that are at the top of our salary scale, like our director, Carl, if he were looking for a job elsewhere, he'd probably be comparing his salary with options in Florida and California and Texas and other transit districts. Whereas if a person operates a bus or rings up tickets or does other hourly jobs like a CDL or a mechanic, he's not going to be looking at what other jobs are available in Texas or California or Florida. He's going to be looking at the hospital and the school district and local trucking companies. So I guess I was wondering if you used the same basket of comparable jobs for both the high salary positions and our hourly positions, because I don't know that that would be giving us appropriate comparables. And it might even be the reason we had to do two different regressions is because we're looking at fundamentally two different competitive markets. That's sort of my question, is if you explored that at all or weighted it.
Let me see if I can try another approach to this. So the Economic Research Institute gives us data for different ranges of salaries. So from, 20 to 40,000, there's an index. From 40 to 50,000, there's an index. From 50 to 60,000, there's an index, and so on and so forth. So there can be a range of differences throughout the salary scale. And so we use those differences in the adjustment factor. So
are you looking at the same data, though? So when we're looking at a CDL salary, do we have out-of-state jobs in the market that you're looking at, that you're running through your algorithm, or did we disregard those because they're irrelevant?
no, we included the hourly salaries. Yeah. I mean, the index
So I
covers
guess
all.
just to clarify, every agency which is listed on that slide, the local as well as the other transit agencies, they saw all 68 positions at MTD. And whoever was filling out the survey, probably some HR specialist who gets stuck with that work, thank you to Sasha who does it all the time, is to say, do I feel confident that I have a match for each one? And then they fill out the exact same data set, whether it's a CDL holding position, whether it's their fellow HR specialist, or it's their CEO general manager. So there is not extra weight given for that hourly, if there is a match, that's likely going to be more favorable to a local entity comparison rather than a Florida comparison. But somebody went through the exact same questions for all 68 jobs.
Certainly. Do you think it might be worth making an analysis of how competitive we are in the local market for hourly staff, since we're struggling so hard to hire operators? It'd be good to know, where do we compare with people that are driving for Illini Swallow, Unit 7, Unit 4, things like that, and say, gee, how do we compare with, where these people are actually looking for other jobs or where we're trying to hire from?
That is something that we could do that was not specifically a part of this specific study. So, if that's something that you're interested in taking up, we could get some proposals on that. I think that would be a quicker, easier study to do.
We might even be able to just throw everything that they give us for data on an Excel spreadsheet and kind of just see where we're at without a formal study, just see where the 7 local agencies looked at for those positions.
Well, we have that. We have the data that went into the study, so we may be able to pull some of that apart on our own. We can take a look at that, but it's a fair question. It wasn't specifically a part of this study.
Additional questions? Margaret?
I was kind of curious to know whether you did any investigation as to whether these other agencies offered the same range of benefits that we did. Or, do they all have retirement schemes? Do they all have sick leave? Do they all have, some of these other things?
If you turn to pages in your slide deck, slides 31 through 37, that was the comparison of where we stand with benefits, where we stand with our IMRF contributions, where we stand with deferred compensation, and all of those additional benefits that we provide. And it compares them to the same organizations that also provided the data for the salaries. Was that your question, or?
I guess I would have been interested to see just a chart that said, bereavement leave, and 7 agencies offer this. Sick leave, 12 agencies offer that. There's nothing in here. It compares us to the market, but it'd be interesting to be comparing our benefit practices to some of these agencies specifically. It's my general impression, I don't know a lot about government, but general impression that our range of benefits is quite large. I mean, I think there are not that many government agencies that offer bereavement leave, for example. But it would be kind of nice to know that.
I think your impression is accurate as well. This, I will say, is just the executive summary. And so there's a full report that we're finalizing and we'll get to you soon that will have some additional information. And we can talk to Gallagher about breaking out some of that benefit data more specifically in that full report. Yeah,
Yeah, it would be super helpful to know, these averages make us look really good, but I'd really like to know how we stack up to just the local agencies too on benefits. And again, that's something, if we just had a spreadsheet with the full responses, we could probably do on our own super easy.
Additional questions from the board for Representatives? Al?
Yeah, it looks like there's a divergence in the yellow line and the dotted line, probably just a little bit before the C5 level on page 21. So that is our area of urgency, I would judge. I don't like to use the word urgency, but something that we need to act on. And I had a couple of questions on that aspect. What is our turnover right now from the C5? I'd like to know what our turnover has been for employees over the last 5 years in those categories. And to see, I'm sure you do, you could get a little deeper and do with your exit interviews, reasons for leaving, whether it was compensation or work conditions or Colorado instead of Illinois, you name it. But that would be one question I would have. So I know what the level of urgency is to taking action on this. The second thing is, how many individuals are we talking about from the C? I see these little triangles, and I'm guessing if I take one of those, that's one person, right? So, I mean, I could do it probably myself, but it would appear that we could look at this as an individual by individual basis and make sure that we're compensating fairly. I also have a concern with the study in terms of, this is all public knowledge, and particularly within the organization, if hourly people see this happening to salaried people, what's the reaction to that? I'd like to get some feedback from the organization that did this survey. Maybe they can give us some background of how you handle this, with in the right manner. But I think these things are valuable, but I don't. We need to look at it a little deeper and look at the person. And if a person's been here 20 years, like Phil said, are they really going to leave? Are they going to go to Colorado? That's the kind of thing that we need to look at. Individual by salaries is negotiable salaries. We work with people a little closer, and we know what their needs are. So
I think one other thing, and again, we can probably do this to some degree, but if you could let us know, especially with these blue collar positions, what shift work looks like. I feel like I've kind of seen it myself with a lot of our diesel guys who are working nights or gals. It is hard to get somebody to come over from another agency and work night shift. So that's another thing we need to kind of be thinking about when we're setting this compensation, or, hey, you're going to start part-time as an operator. That's going to make maybe things a little tougher. So we've got to kind of look at, yeah, we're above market here, but our, scheduling might be a lot harder than working for, United Rentals or something like that. So I want to make sure we've got that sort of, if you've got any thoughts, hey, this starts as a graveyard shift job, just throw that in the margin for us. That way we kind of have that in our minds.
yeah, just one final comment. If I'm counting right, it looks like there's 8 or 9 people below the yellow line on page 21, or is that a fair statement?
Are you looking on the band C to F or the A to B?
C5 on.
Okay, C5 on. In the C band, they are mostly exempt, like you said. So each of those I believe we are dark blue triangles. Each of those dark blue triangles represents one person, just like you said. We have 60 people who work in exempt positions currently. And so there should be roughly 60 little dark triangles. And we do have, we have looked at them on an individual basis, and your full report is going to break down exactly what salary ranges should be. You know, if somebody were to leave and we hire a new person in that particular role, where should we place that person, and why should we place that person in a particular band? So all of that information is being examined as we figure out our budgets and salaries, including in this budget season as well in the next couple, to try to make the corrections based on the recommendations.
So the action that we take, is this what will affect the fiscal year this year? Or are we looking at future years? What's the urgency, I guess?
Well,
What level are we taking?
yeah, so for this budget year that we're currently in, and we did discuss this with trustees, we started to make some incremental corrections. So that has already taken place. Nobody was brought completely up. The attempt to close the gaps and get people both up to market, but also to reflect, if we have an individual on staff who brings 20 years of experience, that places them higher on their salary range. So again, it's getting them up to market, but then also personal to the individual. What experience do they have at MTD and outside that was relevant? So no single staff person was brought up to market, brought up to their expertise. But we did take steps this fiscal year in the budget that we are currently in.
So that's included in the budget already?
That's correct.
Okay.
And I would just like to quickly, don't forget what you were going to say. I just want to summarize what the ask is between Phil and Alan. So we're looking at,
Page?
I'm summarizing your words, so it's not on the page. So hopefully we're all remembering and hearing the same things. So you want to know overall district turnover. So I think that would be by hourly as well as salaried, right? But then you want to know
I'm more concerned about salaried. I said from C5 on.
You're
I'm
only
more-
concerned about salaried.
Yes, because
Okay.
we're divergent at that point.
Sure,
It
sure.
looks like the hourly we're competitive.
Okay.
But
Yes.
you have a lot smaller pool
Yeah, well,
in your salary people than you have in your.
well, I understand that,
Yeah.
but all I'm saying, what is our turnover at the level where we are competing with other MTDs?
Okay.
That's really why we're here. And otherwise, like Phil said, we should be going over and talking to people that got their CDL at some other place,
Okay.
school system.
And so we'll provide that to you by DBM, and then you want to know individual placement. So I just want to prepare you that the full report
Yeah.
doesn't provide you
Okay.
with where staff individually fall. It's just going to give you the salary ranges, but we can work on providing that.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
And what I'm looking for is if you can give me just raw data that shows the local responding agencies. Oh. If you could give me just the local data that shows the local agencies that responded, so we can kind of compare maybe the C5 and below and make sure, hey, it might look like we're competitive nationally, but holy crap, we're way behind locally. We want to make sure that we're where we need to be on that. And then also, if you have any notes about, like I said, our scheduling and stuff, I think that makes a big difference, especially for people that are on that lower end of the spectrum, might have young kids at home, things like that. If we're primarily second and third shift on some of these jobs, that can be a big factor in making us less competitive.
And my comment was going to be, earlier you said worried about the people who work in our A and B bands, and how are they going to feel about the adjustments that have been made in C and up. And I just want to point out, if you look at slide 20, I believe it's page 20, where it focuses on A and B. Yes, our average is really right with the market. The lines line up, but that's the average. Each of those dark blue dots represents not a person, but represents a position, because there's multiple bus operators, there's multiple technicians. So each of those blue dots is one of our A and B kind of hourly, non-exempt positions. And you'll see some are paid higher, than the line, and we do have ones that are under the line. And we did make adjustments for those positions and adjusted our wage scales for, I think it was 5 wage scales, because we wanted to do the same thing for them as we did for our salary and make sure we tried to close that gap, which isn't closed yet for anybody, but it will be when we're through our full implementation. So I just wanted to clarify that.
All right. Additional questions for Cho-Young or Jim or staff? All right. Seeing and hearing none, we will accept this executive summary, put this on file, and we will wait for the entire report when it's complete. Thank you all. Appreciate your study that you put together, and thank you for your presentation. And at this time, we'll step into the Managing Director's report.
All right, thank you, Chair. And as you just mentioned, thank you to Jim and Chu-Young and Amy and Jacinda. All right, this report is on August, just this past August. And we had 651,450 rides, and this is up 15% from the previous August, and only down 8% from August of 2019. So I've got a slide coming up in a little bit that I want to touch back on with that. But that is significant because our revenue hours were down 10% compared to pre-pandemic numbers. So we have 10% fewer hours and only 8% fewer passengers. So I'll touch back on that. If you bring up the well, I guess you have a year to date. Yeah, so you can see our year to date is up 13.68% from fiscal year 2022. Okay, the next slide. This is the one, you know, this is significant. You can really see how we're getting very close to where we were pre-pandemic, which is great, but now we have this whole new problem occurring because we don't have the same number of buses out. And so we are at this kind of push-pull tension spot where we have the ridership recovering, but we don't have the service out on the street. We don't have the service out on the street because, referencing Phil's point earlier, we have this driver shortage, and so we are working on that as aggressively as we can. We've got a few larger classes than we have had in the last several years. So when those trainees are out of training, then that's great. We'll have a lot more people that we can start working with, and hopefully we can start getting additional service back out on the street. So I just wanted to make that point because there's a really close correlation between the number of hours and the number of passengers, and they are an inverse correlation to one another that is potentially causing some problems. So we are trying to address that as we can. All right, moving on. Our operating revenue was up 8.7% from August of last year, and our operating revenue was 13.8% above the previous fiscal year. And our operating expenses were up 12.3% from August of 2021, and the fiscal year to date through August was up 7.5%. Our year-to-date operating revenues were almost $231,000 below budget, and the operating expenses were $1.1 million below budget. And with that, I am briefly going to ask Dave Thornton to come up. Dave is our brand new Assistant Facilities Director. In fact, he is the very first Assistant Facilities Director that the district has ever employed. As I think that we've told you, Kirk Parkland, our facilities director, will be retiring in December, and we are merging the fleet maintenance and the facilities maintenance departments together. And so Josh Beerbaum, our maintenance director, his title is now maintenance and facilities director, and we've hired Dave to be our assistant facilities director, and we are fortunate to have him. So Dave.
Okay, new to this. Thank you for that, Carl. Great to be here. Great to be with MTD. Received a great welcome there. My name's Dave Thornton. I was born and raised in Urbana, graduated Urbana High, attended Parkland. I've been doing facility work most of my adult working life. I started at 15 years old at Bromley Hall at 910 South 3rd in Champaign, 30-story dorm, doing summer maintenance for my uncle. He ran the maintenance department there. Had my own company, did a lot of remodels, Jupiter's downtown, Guido's, Soma, the old hideout, which is Varsity now. I helped build all those facilities out. Used to run facilities for One Main Development, right just down on Neal Street here, the One Main M2 buildings. I spent 10 years there between an employee and a contractor. I spent the last 9 years at Carl's main campus, just down the street from the MTD. I was the lead mechanic there, had a staff of 12 mechanics. We were 24/7, had a lot of vendors, contractors I worked with, so kind of similar to what I'm seeing here at the MTD. I live out near Oakwood, Illinois, a little 10-acre farmette. I like gardening, hiking, canoeing, and visiting state and national parks. Glad to be here.
Welcome, Dave. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. You can see why I say we're fortunate to have him. He's got a lot of great experience. And then next, I'm going to ask Ashley McLaughlin to come up. She is our sparkling, brand new, fresh out of the packaging external affairs director. So, Ashley.
Hi. Not so sparkling. I've been here for a little while, not at MTD, but I grew up in Indiana. I've been in the Midwest most of my life, and I moved to the area for grad school in, I think it was 2006. And I'm trained as an urban planner, so my experience comes from urban planning. I spent the last 9 years working at RPC as a transportation planner and a planning manager. So at RPC, we look at district-wide transportation needs, so that's pedestrians, bikes, vehicles, buses, even some freight. So I'm bringing kind of that broader experience and now trying to learn more about transit specifically to try to fill Jane's shoes. I think that's it.
Thanks, Ashley. We've had the good fortune of working with Ashley at RPC, so she's a good fit here, I think.
Yes, it is true that Ashley is not new to us. We've been in partnership with the Regional Planning Commission and the Metropolitan Planning Organization, QOTS, since QOTS's formation. And so since Ashley has been there, we've worked with her, and so there is some familiarity there. And with that, I will take any questions that you might have through page 32.
Anything for Carl on his report? Seeing nothing, we will move into the first of our action items, which is the Title VI Plan update.
And Drew Bargeman, our Customer Service Director, is our Title VI officer, and so he will be giving this report.
Good afternoon. Sorry about that. Thank you. As Carl mentioned, we are bringing to you today our updated Title VI plan. This is a process that happens once every 3 years, and that plan gets resubmitted then to FTA. And so in the memo and in the plan that we included in the packet, we highlighted some of the changes, and those were the more substantive changes. A lot of the smaller things that were updated in this plan revision had to do with just making sure that the language continued to meet the current operating condition of the district, titles, processes that are in place. But the three things that I wanted to call your guys' attention to today, the first of those is on page 51 of your packet. I'll give you 1 second here to get there. So MTD's major service change policy, I don't know if you remember back in, I believe it was July, I spoke with you. We had performed an analysis on a upcoming service change to the 12-120 teal. And we were asking for approval at that point to move forward with those changes after we had analyzed that, after we had done a Title VI equity analysis. This change to the plan brings it a little bit more in line in how we handle approval of service changes in general. So the previous version of the plan stated that the Board of Trustees would be the one that would approve any of those analyses before those service plans could be put into place. This would move that responsibility to the managing director or a designee that Carl may choose. Mostly this change puts us in line with how we approve service changes. You know, as the board, you are responsible for approving our operating budget, but you're not necessarily approving the operational plan for that service. And so this kind of brings those two processes more in line with each other. The second substantive change can be found on page 54 of the packet. And this is speaking to how MTD calculates vehicle load and what standards that we set for the services that we provide. Right, so if we see vehicles in service that are consistently being overloaded to a certain point, that would trigger for us a review of what's happening on that route and kind of what's going on with that bus in particular, or with that area of the route. And that may mean that it requires a few more resources to make sure that our passengers are riding a little more comfortably, or it could just be that the schedule needs to be adjusted a little bit. And so in previous versions of the plan, we did have these standards included, but we didn't do a fantastic job of explaining how we arrived at what we were doing. And so for both this page and the next page, the vehicle headway standards, we spent quite a bit of time really spelling out the process that goes into making those determinations. And these were suggestions when FTA reviewed our last plan. They made suggestions on doing that work to really spell out how it is that we're arriving at these decisions, so that there's a little more transparency there. So those are the three areas that had the most substantive changes. And so what we are asking from you is to take action to approve this plan so that we can resubmit it to FTA, because this is the last time this happened was in 2019, so it is due again here in 2022. I am happy to take any other questions that you might have before moving to an action item.
Questions for Drew on this? Go ahead, Margaret.
I'm kind of curious. I'm looking at page 54, how you figure the standing room.
So this was actually a pretty interesting process. Our planning department actually went through quite a bit of effort to kind of figure this out. They pulled onboard video from a handful of trips throughout different points in the year and in different areas of the community to kind of understand what 50 people on a bus looked like versus 60 people on a bus, and kind of how much room was still left. Vehicles are, when they're tested, they are given a kind of a rating on how many people could safely fit into that vehicle. Unfortunately, those assumptions don't account for a lot of other factors. I think the standards that they use assume that the average person weighs 150 pounds. They're not carrying a backpack, they're not using a stroller, they're not doing any of these other things that we experience throughout the day. And so they went through a pretty exhaustive effort to understand, a bus on campus, students with backpacks, students with other things, what does that look like versus just your average passenger riding with a briefcase or with a smaller bag. So that's how they kind of figured that out.
More of a real world analysis then.
Exactly.
Right. Good. Additional questions from the board? Go ahead.
Does the FTA make changes in their suggestions or regulations very frequently?
Changes to regulations, not as often, but we are informed when those do happen. They will, upon submission of this plan, they would review that to make sure it includes all of the elements that are necessary. And if they did have some suggestions, they would share those with us. And at that point, we would, adjust things if necessary.
Any additional questions on the Title VI update from the board? Seeing and hearing none, I'll ask for a motion and a second to accept this report and have it move forward. It's been moved and seconded to accept the Title VI plan update. All in favor? Opposed? That motion carries. Next item is thank you, Drew. Our next item is our Resolution 2022-8, the Downstate Operating Assistance Program grant.
Yes, this is our annual resolution that we ask you to pass that allows us to execute the Downstate Operating Assistance Program grant, and that is what we use for our operating expenses and our debt service projects. So this is just, there aren't many details or specifics in this resolution. It is the boilerplate language that IDOT asks us to give to you for approval, and it just authorizes the execution of that.
Questions from the board? I'll ask for a motion and a second to approve.
I move that we approve this resolution.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve Resolution 2022-8 for the Downstate Operating Assistance Program grant agreement. Roll call, please.
Barnes,
Yes.
Chaplin,
Yes.
Vasella,
Aye.
Hannan,
Yes.
Nudo,
Yes.
Dial.
Yes, that motion carries. That is our last piece of action item for today. Thank you for your attention to our extensive consulting report on our compensation study. Our next meeting will be October 26th, right here on Wednesday at 3 o'clock here in the Illinois Terminal. Anything else from the board? I'll ask for a motion and a second to adjourn. Go ahead, Al.
I am confident Jane could get you that number, and she is, I believe, still on the Zoom. So if Carl could entertain you, and Jane, I could ask you to get that number. We could get that pretty quick.
Well,
I am on the Zoom, but his mic wasn't on, so I didn't hear a thing he said.
Jane, can you confirm the cost of the Gallagher study? Or I guess we don't really know what the number. Thank you.
Yeah, I can look that up.
Can you turn your mic on?
As Phil pointed out, a lot of the jobs here are local jobs, and they're going to move not from here to Decatur or from here to Chicago. They're going to take a job at school system or somewhere else. And I brought up specifically, can we do it, when the next time we do it, just do it for salaried, or curtail the amount of positions that we can do here locally outside the realm of their study. And I even had another conversation with Carl later about it, and Carl was diligent enough to check with them, and they gave us some absolutely ridiculous cost reduction if they would have removed that portion of it. It was like, Carl, $200 out of $78,000. But it
was more than that, but it was it might have been $1,500 or something. It was not significant
in reference to the $78,000. And I'm not disparaging their work. I'm just saying I think we can probably take a look at something with a different scope and negotiate a different price with the Gallagher people if we use them again.
The total contract was $47,000.
And I do feel like, especially on the maintenance end, I mean, it's, even if we bring somebody in who's a diesel mechanic, we're dealing with hybrid buses. I mean, these things are so incredibly different from anything we're going to be poaching somebody at United Rentals or whatever to do. I think we've really got to make sure we're, even on the facility side, we have a solar array, and we got a lot going on here that's not your normal apartment maintenance kind of thing. So I just really want to make sure we're comparing apples to apples and we're keeping staff we've had for a long time, because it takes, I'm imagining it takes a pretty long time to get somebody to learn the ropes of maintaining a hybrid bus, even if they have diesel experience. So we just want to make sure we're competitive and we're doing everything we can to retain that staff.
It's a great idea. Bruce, you got something?
I recommend a rehearsal check on these presentations.
Yeah.
That's such a great idea, Bruce, and we actually did do it, and we didn't get any of that feedback. I was even texting the tech booth while the presentation was going on, and he confirmed.
I'm slightly hearing impaired, but I've got it cranked up all the way, and I could hardly hear him.
I know. I also have I also have a hearing impairment, and it was grating on me deeply. I don't know where the problem lies, but we're gonna spend a little time trying to track that down so we can get that resolved.
Not just this one guy.
That'd be great.
No, I know it. I concur.
Rehearse 'em.
Margaret?
I say, was your rehearsal in this room?
It was just before the meeting, and we had no problem with it.
All right. Anything else? We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.